Good morning, everyone. My name is Maribel Königer. I am Director of Journalism and Media at Erste Foundation, and on behalf of Presse Club Concordia, FUME, the Forum for Media and Journalism, and Erste Foundation, I would like to welcome you to this discussion in the framework of European context. European context is a series that we do since quite a while now. The idea is to give first-hand information to journalists, media people, and interested parties here in Vienna, but also welcome on Zoom to those who are online with you today. I keep it short. Our topic today is Chinese diaspora. Mirjana Tomic is, as usual, the very competent and active moderator of this discussion. She will present the guests, and to make it really short and to have more time for the content, I hand over now. So enjoy the discussion.
Thank you very much, Maribel. Good morning to you in the room. Good morning to everyone in Zoom. And good morning to the speakers. Filip Noubel, or Noubel Filip, because I understand in Chinese you first say the last name. So it's Noubel Filip, Yang Chu, and Wu Wei. Although you can call her also Vivian. The topic today is Chinese diaspora in Europe, ideological divides, independent media, and Beijing's control. As always, we shall focus on understanding the context. And that's why we have Filip. I will introduce him right now. He's not the only non-Chinese on this panel, but knows about China just about as much as the Chinese. And Chu, who lives in Denmark, and Vivian, who has started 2 years ago her own independent media. So everyone can speak firsthand about the topic we shall address. I will start today by quoting a recent study conducted by two of our speakers, Chu Yang and Filip Noubel, about the diaspora, a Chinese diaspora in Europe. I quote these two paragraphs. For external observers, Chinese diasporas living in Europe are often perceived through the lenses of enduring simplifications. Chinese migrants and their descendants are mostly involved in small family-owned business. They do not get involved in local or national politics and stick to their own communities. To this reductive image, accusations of acting as Beijing's agents are often added to this portrait. Anything else remains largely a black box in which about 2.5 million people are regarded as one homogeneous group. Yet nothing can be further from the truth of the living experience of different generations, communities of Chinese diaspora members. While there are many owners of restaurants, groceries, small retail shops, workers in garment factories, there are also journalists, academics, civil society members, artists, innovative entrepreneurs, younger people who lobby for and participate in political and civil society activism, create and develop independent media, civil society network who join European state and non-state institutions to make the diversity of their community visible. End of the quote. Our speakers will explore the profile of the Chinese diaspora, their integration and identity. The difference is what is the main shock when they come to Europe? How does Beijing perceive Europe and China? Independent media in exile, political control of Beijing, of the diaspora, and local differences in different European countries. From what I understand, there is a huge difference in how Chinese community interacts or about its political activism or cultural life, depending on the European country. I learned in the meantime the biggest Chinese communities are in England and in France, in the UK and France. Let me introduce the speakers. The first one to my right is Filip Noubel. Noubel Filip. He's an editor, reporter, researcher, and literary translator with 30 years of experience in covering news, training journalists, and developing projects. He's editor-at-large for Global Voices and senior China analyst for the Prague-based Association of International Affairs, AMO think tank. His current research focuses on Chinese-speaking diasporas and Taiwan-Ukraine relations. Noubel worked for Internews, the UN International Crisis Group, the Institute for War and Peace Reporting, and Prague civil society sector. He worked for media projects in Beijing for over 10 years and currently spends long periods of time in Taiwan. Now comes the most interesting part. He's a Czech French by birth. He grew up in Tashkent, Uzbekistan, and in Odessa, former USSR. Filip works and speaks on social media in Czech, English, French, Mandarin Chinese, and Russian. He studied at the Charles University in Prague and at the National Institute for Oriental Languages and Civilizations in Paris, and he shares his residence between Taipei and Prague. Chu Young, the second to my right, is a journalist and media researcher specializing in Chinese digital media and diaspora communities, currently serving as project coordinator at the China Media Project and China analyst at AMO. It is the same organization as where Filip is also collaborating. She leads a capacity building initiative for Chinese language journalists globally and analyzes information manipulation targeting diaspora communities. This topic will be of great interest here. She worked with prominent Chinese media, including Caixin or Caixin. And she was the founder of several groundbreaking media initiatives, including The Newcomers, a digital Chinese language platform serving European diaspora communities, and the Wuhan COVID-19 Cyber Graveyard, which archived censored content across Chinese social media platforms. Yang also co-founded the Chenqi journalism project, credited by The Economist as China's most successful civic media initiative. She holds an MA in journalism, media, and globalization from the Erasmus Mundus journalism program in Denmark and a BA in broadcasting journalism from Ohio University. She is originally from Anhui province in China and lives in Aarhus, Denmark. Last but not least is Vivian Wu, or Wu Bei. She's an award-winning journalist, founder and CEO of Dasheng Media, an independent platform for global Chinese language journalism, and former news editor of BBC Chinese, and she was the bureau head of Hong Kong, China. She left Hong Kong in 2022, and she now lives in New York. With over 18 years of experience in both Chinese and English media world, she has also reported for the Central China TV, South China Morning Post, Intune Media, and Portrait magazine. Her work was awarded on multiple occasions by the Society of Publishers of Asia. Originally from Lanzhou province? Lanzhou, Gansu province, People's Republic of China. Vivian Wu holds a BA in English and Literature from Renmin University, MA in International Communication from the Beijing University, and MA in Political Science from New York, from the New School in New York. And Filip and Vivian, they have a weekly podcast in Mandarin Chinese. So the format is simple, which I'll have a conversation with the three of them. We have incredible speakers, and then you are all welcome to ask questions offline and online. So first question, Filip. Give us an overview of the Chinese diaspora of Europe. Explain to us the waves of arrivals, the main diversity, the main challenges, and what is the relationship between different generations of migrants before we go to a real Chinese migrant in Europe?
Sure. Thank you so much for having us today. It's really a great honor. Thank you for those also coming online. And I see at least the audience in the room, I think, is quite mixed. So I understand there are people who have a China background who are probably also Chinese. But I think that before I start, I want to give maybe 3 keywords just to launch the conversation with everyone. Because precisely if you're not very familiar with China in sort of political, cultural, linguistic sense, I think it's important to maybe think of 3 directions that can kind of help you drive the map. And so I would like you to remember at least 3 key words of this conversation. The first is nuance, the fact that, as you said, from the outside, if you do not speak Chinese or you're not part of the community or part of the people who look at the community, there's a tendency, especially in Europe, to put everyone in the same bag. And as this conversation today will show, it's actually extremely diverse in terms of origin, social status, political engagement, and relationship both to Europe and to China, but also on the issues of Taiwan and Hong Kong. So the first one is nuance. The second one is risks. And as someone who has been looking at how a lot of European governments talk about the different Chinese communities and diasporas, and I prefer to use the plural, is that precisely very often from a European perspective, when we say the risk, it means what is the risk that this community, because they use the singular, could bring to Europe? But there is very little questioning about the risks that this community experiences as living in Europe. And I'm sure all of us will be talking about this. So nuance, risk, and maybe a sort of more than a glimmer of hope, but looking at the future, I think what is really interesting that we see, and maybe not completely unique to Europe, but quite interesting, is what some of us call the parallel polis, in the sense that when you're part of those communities who are really engaged, you tend to recreate entire cultural, media, and political structures that are not completely European, are not Beijing dominated or created by Beijing, but are actually coming out of the community. So nuance, risks, and parallel polis.
Excuse me, I just want to interrupt you 1 second. I forgot to mention one thing. We shall focus on people from China. We are not going to speak about Chinese communities from Malaysia, Singapore, and other countries. We are speaking about the Chinese diaspora from China.
Exactly. It's actually almost my next point, because there's a term that some people like to use, some people don't like to use, but I think it's important for you to at least hear it, is when we speak European languages, we only have one word, let's say in English, to say Chinese, whether we describe the people or the language. But in the different Chinese languages, Mandarin, Cantonese, Taiwanese, to say Chinese language or Chinese people, there are about a dozen terms, and every term has a historical, political, cultural nuance. So we always have this problem when we switch between English and Chinese, that we tend to oversimplify it.
I don't have the problem.
and that's part of the question. So the term that I want to mention is that it's quite popular now in academia, is Sinophone, because it's the equivalent of Chinese speaking, but I think that it sort of decenters, for example, Mandarin or Beijing, and can include other people, including people in Taiwan, but also precisely ethnic Chinese from Malaysia. So really, to answer your question, yeah, very briefly, depending, of course, on how you describe Europe, there are about 1.5 to 2.5 million people who, I guess we can say, claim some Chinese identity, regardless of their citizenship, regardless how many generations, regardless whether they do go back to China or cannot go back to China or come from Hong Kong. I think it's important to mention Hong Kong. So maybe super briefly, this is like going very fast, I would mention 4 different waves of Chinese immigrations or diasporas making. So there's the sort of, in Europe, the older one that started actually in the 19th century, as you said, in the UK and France. And here it's important because we are, well, I don't know how you define Austria, but I'm mostly from the Czech Republic, so I think this is Central Europe or Eastern Europe to some extent when you go further east. But most of the diasporas in Europe started in what we call today Western Europe, so precisely the UK and France. And so this wave grew through different government-to-government agreements, but to go super quickly, landmark 1949, which is when the People's Republic of China was founded, and then up to the 70s, you have those historical older generations that today are maybe generation 3, 4, 5, mostly in Western Europe. Then we have the 80s, and the 80s correspond in the People's Republic of China to economic reforms, which accelerated 2 things. The traditional historical migration from what we call coastal China, so provinces that are just basically across Taiwan in mainland China, where people from Fujian, from Wenzhou, those places, anyway, had the historical tradition of migration around the world, including Africa. So they started coming to Western Europe and establishing precisely what you probably know as the traditional Chinese business, a small shop, maybe tailor-related or food-related restaurants and things like that. And it's important to understand that those people have their own language, their very strong identity, which is connected to this region. And I would argue that before they say they are Chinese, their first identity is actually this regional, or sometimes it's even this town, like Wenzhou. I'm a Wenzhou person before I'm anything else. So this is maybe the sort of the visible part for a lot of Europeans who are not focusing on China. And of course, 89 is Tiananmen massacre. So we also had a wave of people leaving China more for political reasons, not so big, but that's the two sort of ways. And then if we move like super fast forward from, let's say, the 90s to, I would say, 2010, we have maybe 2 or 3 mainstreams, or quite different people in terms of social and geographical origin, which is the sort of the beginning of first massive students coming from, of course, all over China, north, south, east, west, to study, but then, of course, some deciding to stay, to intermarry, to maybe go back to China because it would open job opportunities, maybe to return to Europe. So it's a completely different group from the previous one. You have also, of course, a little bit of illegal immigration, which continues to this day. And you also have, I think it's important to mention, also non-Han people, so Tibetans, Uyghur people, leaving mostly for political persecution. And it's also the beginning of tourism, and I think it's important to mention tourism because this is when massively more Chinese people were able to travel to Europe. And of course, you come to Europe as a tourist, but it might give you some ideas for your kids to send them to school. So it's a sort of projecting yourself in the future that maybe Europe, for me, for my children, for my nephew, could be a destination. So that it sort of opened a lot of conversations of what if, one of us decided to move to Europe. And maybe the fourth group, I don't like this term. I think a lot of people have an issue with this term, but it's what we call the expats, which is, of course, very different, and we can debate for a long time, what does it mean to be an expat and all the sort of the privileges. But it's also the time, at least until before COVID, where a lot of big Chinese companies, enterprises, whether state-owned or privately owned, started developing big offices or big projects, let's say in Europe. And so, of course, they needed very highly qualified Chinese people, or very often speaking English or local European languages. So this is a sort of white-collar expat type, which, in certain parts of especially Western Europe is quite big. And it's also the time where, in terms of geography in Europe, you see the expansion of Chinese communities in Central and Eastern Europe. The biggest ones now are in Hungary and in Poland. And very quickly, I would mention maybe around COVID and 2019, because 2019, if you remember the news, is a sort of the beginning, really, of the end of democracy in Hong Kong. So you have a massive migration that started before and that continues to this day. And of course, because COVID was such a traumatic experience for people in China, that people who were able to travel back and forward, who had half of their life in China and half of their life in Europe, but in the US and Australia, realized that you could get trapped in China for several months, not being able to travel, losing your job in Europe, or having to come back to China to bury your family members, all kinds of complications that open a new wave of discussion of maybe we should consider moving, let's say, to Europe, or one member of our family would get a European citizenship and the other would retain a Chinese one, and then we could sort of travel back and forth. So I know it's a lot of information and going really fast in terms of history, but I hope that it kind of begins to map different sort of strands. And the really last thing I want to say is that very often, I think in the perception, maybe the most invisible group tend to be the second or third generation of people, let's say, who came precisely from those families in the 80s. So from coastal China. Your parents, your grandparents came, opened a restaurant, a little shop. But now you're second, third generation, most likely you have European citizenship, maybe both. You probably went to the local school, so you have a very strong, I think, European/hybrid identity. You speak the language, and you can act as a sort of go-between. And this group is really, I think, interesting and very often not so present, let's say in the media, for example, in the Western media. So I'll stop at that.
Thank you so much. Well, the next question goes to Chu. Well, I have actually quite a few questions. Well, I'll say several questions, and you can summarize them. Well, first of all, why do you think that the Chinese community is visible, but it's also invisible? Quite a few people in the interviews the two of you did for your study mentioned cultural differences. What are these main cultural differences and cultural shock that you, as you belong to the last generation, you came to Denmark in 2020. What are these main differences in adapting to European life? Then I would also like you to mention a bit the relationship between, in different European countries, between Chinese community and the participation in local life. And the last question, and then I have more. I understand that there are not only journalists, and we'll talk to Vivian about journalism, but there are lots of activists. And we don't really know their names. Why are Chinese activists invisible? Which are the main areas of activism? And I understand that several European countries support them, but we don't know about them. We know about the Russians, but we don't know about the Chinese. Well, let's start with these few easy questions. Go ahead, Chu.
First, thanks for having us here. I think maybe I want to leave the why many of the activists stay anonymous for Vivian. She probably have a good say in this.
Okay.
Yeah. So for the first one, like why Chinese invisible, why Chinese diaspora or Chinese community in Europe is visible but invisible. Why visible is quite apparent because Chinese from Asia, like apparently we have different appearance. So when you spot a Chinese on the street, you can tell easily, oh, that's not from Europe. But why it's invisible? Because my work spans from both journalism and policy making. So I think like that reason is first, public perception is mainly defined by media reports or what we read from about China or like what the news report the diaspora community in Europe. What's the last time you actually remember a story about what's happening here in Europe? Like what's the story you can remember from public media, if you can recall? Not that much actually. When European mainstream, like if we talk about like Deutsche Welle or other public broadcasting company, when they report China, mainly China is covered as like the topic of international news or as a part of the subject of foreign affairs. So you don't really read story about the diaspora, the stories of diaspora media, which falls into the category of domestic news. So when we read news, we read about like what China is doing or China is a threat. So that's basically define how we think about Chinese in Europe. They are the extension of China, or they are the agents or like sleeping agents of the Chinese authority. So that's basically how the Chinese community is defined by it's always associated with China in one way or another, and it's fell into the geopolitical tensions. It's within the framework of the geopolitical tensions, but they don't really have their own story. You don't really often hear about their living experience here. There are some, but most likely not that positive. Like in Prato, there are like, because of the textile industry, so there are a lot of more concentrated community closed. You can often see like a violation of worker, like labor rights. Though that's the stories associated with the Chinese community. Or like in Spain, there are like recently there are news about the I think like smuggling or something like that. So like most likely it's negative news, negative coverage. So you don't really see like the normal living experience of them here. I think that's why they are invisible. And on the other, this is one hand. On the other hand, especially I talk about like the Prato, the community in Prato, or like
Excuse me, may I just say what is in Prato for those who do not know? Prato is the biggest Chinese community in Italy. It's about 20 or 30 years old,
Yeah.
and they produce textiles.
Yeah.
And I recall about 15, 20 years ago, there were a lot of news stories and reportages about exploitation of Chinese exploiting Chinese, and Italian police raiding, and then people eat and sleep and work all at the same place. So Prato is in some way, correct me if I'm wrong, a symbol of Chinese exploiting Chinese with fake goods, or they are probably not even fake goods because they are produced on the Italian territory,
yeah.
but for other wages.
Yeah, yeah. So that's the thing like in Prato, and because of the language barrier, and also because of the type of immigrants coming to Europe. So those are the the community with more concentrated population. It's a quite a close community, so they don't really interact with the local, or we say like the European society that much. That's another reason why it's really hard to reach that community or like to cover their story. Those two factors actually make the story of to make Chinese community visible but invisible in Europe. The main thing. The second question you asked about the cultural differences. So from my experience, or from the way we talk to our interviewees, I think main thing is like the individualism in Europe, or like at least after coming to Europe, many people can actually start focusing on their own happiness instead of like living up to other people's expectations. That is like one major thing for them. They can start to like, oh, what I actually want for my life, or like what kind of job I want to do, or like what kind of a relationship we want to keep in our life. Maybe this is kind of a foreign topic for many people here, is that in general in Asian or East Asia, I can't speak for Southeast Asia, but in East Asia, family had this kind of toxic relationship. It's like the first impression many people after coming to Europe is like, oh, people can actually have healthy relationship within family. It's like we support each other, we love each other, but within China, most people are like owning to each other. That's the big change in dynamic. And also often in Eastern Europe, people keep the family relationship or tight kept family relationship by guilty tripping. Is like, oh, I have done so much for you, so you have to reward, or like you have to live up my expectations, otherwise you are disappointing. So this is the kind of the turning point for many people, that they can live a life they fully like, or like fully want, without thinking too much about what other people want from them. And the last question is about the patterns in different diaspora cultural or media activities in different countries.
And political activities.
Yeah, political. So I think it has a correlation between the concentration of population in countries with more concentrated community, like population, like France, or newly like Germany and the Netherlands. People are more active both in political and culturally. But with with countries like Italy and Spain, of course, they have a huge community, but those are the migrants or diaspora coming for more economic incentive. So they are, most of them like strive to sustain a life or like trying to focus more on like making money or making profit. So those parts, although they have a lot of Chinese community, a huge Chinese community, but not much political or cultural participation there. The other countries with fewer or like less concentration of a community or like less population, there is a gap or like there's a vacuum, not much going on. So we can see still the central are France, Netherlands, and Germany.
I have just one follow-up question before I address Vivian. And when speaking of invisibility, I was also referring to, for example, all three of you are part of Circle 19. It is an press freedom organization affiliated to Reporters Without Borders. And on the website, it states only 5 names are visible. The rest, we cannot disclose who is in the organization. Why? This is also invisibility, and it has nothing to do, I think, with Europeans.
Of course, we know, like we all know, like the political control of Beijing, or like there are so many studies have done about the long arm governance. That's why a lot of people yes, if you decide, okay, everything going to public, everything I do will go public, that means like you have prepared for the worst, that your family will be harassed, or like you don't want to, or you already decided that you don't need to go back to China anymore. Most people, that's a really high price to pay. That's why a lot of people choose doing things anonymously, that they are still open to the option, or like at least keep the door open that they can still go back home.
Thank you. And now we come to Vivian or Wu, whatever. My first question, before I ask you about independent media, my first question is, in one interview you said to the Carter Foundation, you said that many correspondents of the Western media in China don't even speak Chinese, and they depend on fixers and local translators. Could you just give, well, I assume you meant mainly in English, but could you just give us your opinion of the coverage of you live in the US, of the main US media, or probably UK as well, of China? What did they get right? What did they get wrong?
Okay. Thank you for having me here. Just quickly, first, before I start to give this answer, just to quickly explain the landscape where so-called foreign journalists or internationals that can work in China. First is like before this most recent decade, 10 years ago, before Xi Jinping came to his office and became the king of the country, actually there was a very active and a big number of journalists from different outlets from all over the world. Not to mention New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, Financial Times, Le Monde, Economist, many of those, they are actually are experts, or they themselves are either historian or sinologist. Those correspondents, they have English, they have Chinese skill, they also have a lot of cultural background and accumulation of knowledge. And they also, usually, historically, they're from the families that have kind of, tradition, family tradition, or family bonds with the country. So this cultural familiarity used to be a signature for those Chinese China correspondents. Maybe, for example, I always say journalist Chris Buckley, who is still working for New York Times. Now he's based in Taiwan, but for the first 20 years, he worked for New York Times or other newspapers. He was always in China. I remember we were chatting in native Beijing dialect. Even though I was born in Lanzhou, I spent most of the time in Beijing, capital city. So I remember those correspondents represented by senior journalists like Chris. They have this very solid knowledge about China, not only the history of Chinese society, political system, also a lot of skills they can read between the lines. I know this is the most difficult part for the world to understand China, because Chinese government, especially its propaganda machine, they always try to just cloud your mind. That is on purpose. If they issue a policy or documents, they just use language and then nobody can decode, but that's on purpose. Their goal is to use the nonsense language to bullshit the topic so nobody challenge them on paper or in press room. But when I was writing the article and I was talking to the younger journalist who was from Carter Center, he asked me this, Vivian, why are you saying you are so disappointed with the international media? Or maybe more specifically, why did you leave BBC? So this also addressed a second change to the language issue. The younger generation of correspondents you see from those international outlets, they have to have their focus on their career path. Maybe they're stationed in Beijing for 3 years, and then they're in Moscow, and then they're in Philippines, and then they're back to London or Paris or Vienna. So they have to always serve their home audience. And their news agenda, their on the daily basis editorial discussion about what I should bring to my home audience is not decided by what's really going on in China. Rather, it's decided how their home audience, home readers, view China, what is the expectation of their editor and the journalist back to their home newsroom. This was actually the biggest challenge I had when I was the head of BBC in Hong Kong. Also, I had 2 titles, BBC head in Hong Kong, which I have to, in that role, I have to serve multimedia. It's like a broadcast from BBC Radio, live TV requests on breaking news from London for their 9 p.m. news, and then on the daily basis, a website in Chinese that I serve the Chinese audience who use Chinese, but more importantly, provide the original story that we collect from the region, but still send back to London. So on a daily basis, I see this gap of expectation. It's also about the higher level of editors and managers back home. They have no knowledge and no language of the country you're covering, which totally makes sense. Why you as Australian need to speak Chinese, right? So this is, I think this is this lack of interest. It's very cultural, also very language-based, but most important is about the Chinese government's constant restriction and the limitation on your work base. Imagine a foreign journalist. He lives in Beijing. He can't really meet any local Chinese without help from his personal assistant. Imagine they can't use the language because they have no time to learn the Chinese, which is very, very difficult. I don't imagine I can learn French in my 40 anymore, even though I want. So there's a challenge for them very quickly. They have to land in the country, and they have to make a local context. They have to make sure that they understand what's really going on in the city, and then they have to decide what are the most important stories that I can pitch to my editor back home. So they have to rely on their translator and a news assistant. All of those translator and news assistants are Chinese native. They are very good journalists, but legally, even for nowadays, no Chinese native citizen are legally allowed to work for international media as journalists or to have their byline. They can get paid, but they can't really get their story published in their brand name. So there's a very great, big piece of gray area, like a Chinese native journalist. They pitch the most important stories first internally to their correspondent, who's their first boss, and their correspondents depend on all the concerns I mentioned, decide which story they pitch to their home editors. And the editors need to decide based on the local political, social, cultural concerns or priority of the interest, which story goes to the headline or goes to the prime time broadcast.
Vivian, I have a follow-up question.
Yeah.
Before we go, all three of you, in fact, present yourselves as someone who explains Europe to China and China to Europe. Vivian, what is this Beijing view of Europe, very without nuances, and vice versa? What does the average Chinese think of Europe, and what do you think? And then, Chu, maybe you can say, what is, in your view, how do you say is the average view of China? We are scared of it, they're a tech giant, and what do we do with them? Please go ahead.
So based on the ecology I just mentioned, you can see usually there are two ways, one way or another, for the world and the China to understand world, or for the world to understand China. Most of the Chinese people in China, they still get the information or they consume the content from the outlets that publish or broadcasting in Chinese for sure. And I don't know how much you know about the China's media censorship, and I know it is the most notorious term if you talk about China's press. But internet control is flawless there, almost flawless. China has the most powerful, most developed, the most sophisticated great firewall in this world. That means all the services, all the platforms, social media, you name it, so from Facebook to Twitter to YouTube, Instagram, Telegram, WhatsApp, Signal, you just name it. Anything that you are familiar in the outside world are blocked in China. That means that 0.4 billion Chinese people, even though every one of them has a phone, when they buy a phone made in China, by default, you can't download those apps from your Google Store, your Apple Store. Those apps don't exist. So if you live in that culture, if you live in that environment for 20 years, you are cut off from the so-called digital transformation of the outside society. But in the meanwhile, don't imagine Chinese people are living in a culture desert. No, the local entertainment industry is super developed. We have every version of the most popular platforms, online streaming or social media. You find at least one of 5 copycats versions in Chinese, produced by Chinese, served Chinese, published in Chinese. So this closed circle, recycle of self-produced, consumed content creates the largest market of entertainment and media journalism industry in Chinese. And then those people, how could they understand Europe? Of course, CCTV news, 7 p.m. It's broadcast by CCTV. It's basically on the daily basis propaganda instructive directives that every Chinese can get from the central party. And for the 30 minutes broadcast, 20 minutes is about domestic news, what Xi Jinping has done. If he's meeting 5 groups of people, you find his faces appears 5 times in the first 20 minutes. So we have a joke in China for CCTV news. Only the weather and date are true. And secondly, and the major goal of CCTV and all those news produced by the domestic media is to achieve 3 goals. First, China is great. Everything in China is developing perfectly. Second, Chinese people are happy. Then you find all kinds of version stories to illustrate Chinese people are happy. Third, the world, especially USA, is suffering. American people are dying. Europe people, they need us. Europe, culturally, much more beautiful, much more admirable. We have a lot of good relationship with Germany, France, Austria is also on the list of nice countries. But if you address the human rights issue, not exist. And if there's any for correspondence, challenge the Foreign Affairs Ministry spokesperson who is holding weekly news press and announce the Chinese government's feedback to the world. It's always cut, censored, and only those useful information that serve the first two goals, Chinese people are great, China is best, the world is suffering, only those information can be presented on the Chinese media. So in this bubble of propaganda, it's hard for most of the Chinese people to get objective or fair understanding of the outside world, Europe in particular. But I have to mention, also China had this state-run capitalism, materialism, consumerism. Chinese people, especially middle upper class, they dress, eat, drink, everything exactly the same as we do here in Europe. So you can't say people live in a very painful, poor material life. Materially, completely life. If you have the best Chanel designer type here, in 2 minutes, all the social media in Chinese will show the same fashion show. So it's only political stories or the political story that the Chinese government don't like that don't exist. But very quickly, what's your question is how the world?
Very quickly, I will come back to you. I want to ask Chu, how do you, in this description that Vivian made, where do you place on the diaspora media? Can you give us a landscape of diaspora media? And is there any connection between this media landscape in China, inside China, and diaspora media? And then I have another question for you. Go ahead.
I mainly want to focus on like a diaspora in media because that's more relevant to the audience here. So we just did a research which will be published soon earlier about how the Chinese diaspora media cover the European elections. So for that one, we can see there is, of course, in Europe, there is like one state-backed newspaper, and they also have on different social platforms. That one is called like 欧洲时报. It's like European Time, or like for that one, they have. So basically, the discourse there you can see is like Europe is in decline, and the right wing is on the rise, and a lot of protests and the chaos in Germany, in both Germany and France. Other changes happen there, and also you can see like the election manipulation and or other bribery related news, just all the political scandals. So that's the political discourse, like try to push by the states. But on the other hand, that one is the state-backed media is the consumption of the state-backed media is just like any other other state media. It's not well produced, and the people don't really care about what they write. Like Vivian mentioned, like a CCTV news, but like it's not just in China, but also like in Europe. How many people are still watching news on TV? It's not that much. So yes, they are pushing that discourse, but not people is consuming it. Where do people get news? Social media. That's where people get the news. But for diaspora Chinese diaspora community in Europe, a thing is the news they actually need that can guide or can help in their life doesn't produced or provided by state media. State media doesn't have the capacity to produce local news that can meet the needs. That's a vacuum or a gap filled by a lot of local media in Europe, Most of them are like just maybe like business owners, local business owners, or like some of the service providers. They provide services to Chinese community, and that's their incentive to provide the news that's more associated with their local life in Europe, to attract followers, or like attract potential customers. That's their incentive, or like the news providers about what's happening in daily life. So that one is super local focused. It's more like there are like Huarenzie or Chinese street or something in Italy, and there is also other like lifestyle or local life-oriented media in Netherlands and even Denmark. There's a different, in Denmark, Sweden, they all have this kind of a local news that provide them news. But the problem with that one is like they don't really do original reporting. Most of the news they publish are just translated of the news written by local news outlets. So they don't do, so you can't really see original reporting there. That's the gap, that's still a gap that could be filled. And
wait a second, you said that this diaspora media that covered, in the study that you did, that covered the elections, they think...
No, that's mainly the state-backed. They actually cover the election. The local media, because they focus more on local life. So the European election is just too far away. So they cover like, oh, there is a new policy in the municipality or in the country, that a new policy, that how that will affect your life, something like this. So it's more local oriented.
And what is the impact, what is the influence of Beijing on this diaspora media?
Not that much.
I disagree.
Yeah, it's not really that much, because like I think it's beyond Beijing's capacity to reach that far. They don't really have the capacity like to produce news or to run that media. And also for the local media, local diaspora media, they actually have this incentive to provide people what people need.
I disagree.
Okay.
When you say influence, you have to also, because the landscape, we can spend a week talk about Chinese media landscape. So let me know if you really need to hear that. You can spend another week maybe online. So very quickly, just to bear in mind, I'm saying this great firewall, but remember this is one way, meaning Chinese consumers, Chinese audience, they just can't access the media outside. But the Chinese diaspora audience, they can read and watch anything they want domestically produced. Also, as Chu mentioned, it's social media that dominates people's attention and the feed of information. All the Chinese people here live in Austria, Europe, anywhere, they still rely on Chinese social media. As I mentioned, WeChat, you probably know, WeChat is one of the largest, it's owned by Tencent, one of the top 10 largest IT companies in the world. But Tencent also has the largest network of social media reach on everybody's phone. And also WeChat is not just a source for people to read about their news, it's also everything, a wallet, the way you talk to your family, you book tickets, you read everything. And they have both the timeline that feeds you a TikTok type of short video. They also have public accounts that can publish articles. Even a lot of Chinese diaspora media who publish locally or run their own content in Europe, they still get their content published on WeChat. So I think the influence, when you say Beijing influence to control the diaspora media, it's not about physically they have one or two editors working in those overseas office. It's a control of the mindset. It's also control of the market demand. And remember, yes, I agree, newspapers in Austria covering a town level election is very local, and the CCP doesn't care about it, Beijing doesn't care about it. But
CCP is Central China TV.
yeah, no, not
Chinese Communist
CCP,
Party.
Chinese Communist Party.
Okay,
Chinese
sorry.
Communist Party, so I call it CCP. It's basically Beijing. But remember, if the content is published on WeChat, which is owned by Tencent, and Tencent, as a company, they have internet police who works in their office. So the Chinese government sent the police to station in those IT companies. And those big companies, they own the largest outreach network to Chinese, no matter where physically you live, as long as you use those platforms, you are controlled by this whole system of information control, intimidation, imitation. That's how the so-called long-arm governance works too.
Okay, I think Chu wants to respond, then I want to go on with another
topic. Can I just add a little bit more? Is like yes, we talk about like. Of course, people use WeChat but we during our interviews we can see that people have, I think, like like for me personally, I don't want to underestimate people's agency or like the way people's innovations. In our interviews, we can actually see that people develop a quite sophisticated strategies to navigate this landscape. Yes, they keep their WeChat, but mainly keep their WeChat to communicate with the family back in China. But then they also switch or try to use different like platform to consume news that more incorporate with the European information landscape or like the more global, like Instagram and other things. Or they try, some of them even try to consume local news sources. Yeah. So I just don't think like I don't want to imagine China. Of course, we should be aware the long arm, or like we should aware the order police, or like the censorship and the restrictions, all that exist. But also, I think we can't just think of this as a monster that clouding all aspects of life. People are innovative and also creative.
Yeah.
Thank you, Vivian, and then I'll come to you. Give us a brief, if possible, overview of this independent media landscape. Where are most of them? Your podcast or your medium was declared one of the 5 most important in Chinese abroad. Who is your audience? What do you really want to transmit to your Chinese audience? It is in Chinese, and with all these firewalls, how do people in China can access? I understand there is something like Teacher Lee, and then people repost, and then they are forbidden, and they repost again, but briefly.
I know. She always worries I say too much. I will try to be conservative. Very quickly, sorry to depress you if the landscape and ecology I was describing as desperate. As Chu said, innovation is and the resilience people use to break down this ecology and find a space to work. Based on my previous experience working journalism in China, outside China, in Hong Kong, in English, serve the world covering China, and also in Chinese, serve the Chinese audience, I think a lot. I think if we know all those status quo in there, where is the opportunity? That's why I do 大声, 大声 mighty voice, meaning loud and very loud. And so in the US, I made up several decisions. First is that I choose not to publish in any platforms that the CCP can easily control. I'm saying literally, technically. So I don't publish on WeChat. I don't publish on TikTok. Either it's Douyin or TikTok or any popular Chinese platforms. I just refuse to publish. Because once you appear there, then it becomes your daily worry that your get censored. And then you worry about the space. And nobody now controls me because they don't send me instructions. But I don't want to make myself worry that one day I will be deleted. And then I start to self-censor. So the decision on day one is I only publish on the free platforms, naming them. We now have a YouTube channel
Is YouTube allowed in China?
Yes, as I mentioned, YouTube is definitely blocked in China. But before I say that, always bear in mind, I mentioned the Great Firewall, but it's just a wall. So any wall, they have holes. There are always holes. And those holes are somehow left on purpose for those people who are in universities, in their departments, or any organizations they need to monitor and see the world. They don't want their people see the world, then they need to monitor what we say here. So there are a lot of holes. And very interestingly, no matter I was in BBC in China, in Chinese, which is definitely international media. By the way, all the international media are censored and blocked. So not any BBC, CNN, New York Times, FT, whatever, they can't be accessed in Chinese either. I forgot to mention. But we always have audiences coming from China. I can see from my daily data, always up to 30% of my audience are from China. Either they show IP address directly, which is 15% of my audience. I just see the IPs from China. I believe they're the officials. They're those people who don't need the VPN to access. And another 20 to 30% of people, I believe they use VPN. Do you understand what is VPN? Circumvention tools that can help them to surpass the wall. So also, YouTube is blocked, but I have a YouTube channel. So within 18 months, I get 80,000 followers. Who are they? They are well-educated, overseas students, or the first, second, third generation of immigrants. Very liberal, very honest, good readers, very, very eager to understand the world, also want to do this double check of everything. If they find a nonsense on CCTV.
What are your main topics?
Main topics, I have 3 types of work that I think it just provide an alternative to the market I was just describing. I have sit-down interviews. I interview scholars, intellectuals, writers, whatever, who either their stories, they are story makers, or they are the figures in the story. I give them sit-down interviews, and topics are super heavy and serious. That's why I don't know how I come up with so many audience. Our topics is all this verbal history, family history that are forbidden, or on purpose deleted by the Chinese media. And also how we as Chinese see the world as global citizens. So we talk about everything like democracy, freedom, but not that political, because I know political news is so boring. So it's a family history, it's an intellectual discussion, what the future of USA, for example, if there's still future. We have all the topics that popular everywhere, like immigration, is immigration a good idea? How to look at the history and the collective guilt and the collective responsibility, how you survive as a free rider if you decide to leave the country, feminism, totalitarian regime, all kinds of stories that are not allowed in the Chinese media.
Thank you. I will now come to Filip. Is there investigative journalism in independent media and diaspora media? And what are these red lines? What are the topics that are better avoided?
Wow, how much time do we have? I mean, the first...
Not much. We are already over an hour.
The first thing I want to say, because that's often a source of frustration, and because also you mentioned Circle 19, which is this organization where we all participate and support as volunteers, is that investigative journalism does exist in the Chinese language landscape, and it was very vibrant until Xi Jinping arrived, also inside China. And it's very important for the historical record because there was a tradition, and there are very important people who did top quality investigative reporting that was possible until basically 2012, 2013. But within that system, there were also very, very clear red lines that when you do an investigation, for example, you kind of play different powers. So you play the provincial government against the central government. you're a journalist from province A and you cover a corruption case in province B because you're kind of, shielded a little bit. So this was all possible, and if you go to the homepage of circle19.org in English, you don't have to speak Chinese, you will actually find some of those records. This is also one of the reasons why we're doing this Circle 19, is to show and remind ourselves that it did exist. And I would argue that from time to time today, we have a few glimmers of that golden period that ended in 2012. Now, of course, when you move to overseas, Sinophone media, and mostly in the West, but that includes, for example, Japan, we have to also kind of explain what the West means. I think there are two things that explain why we see less of it. Because, of course, usually the people who are outside of China don't have access, right? I mean, unless they have a sort of someone who's taking a lot of risks to really investigate locally, it's kind of hard to do this. And we talk to people, for example, who are from Hong Kong and who now live in Taiwan or in the UK. The distance is even worse when you do investigation, because people said, well, were you there? Like, did you talk to the local people? Like, did you interview or at least try to take a picture? And it becomes much more difficult. Maybe there's also less interest in the audience, because as we all said, I think that the message is quite clear that what is being built here is a hybrid identity of you, of course, are Chinese, whatever that means, and more in the sort of cultural identity terms, not necessarily passport or political allegiance, but you're also Danish, French, Czech, and Austrian, and so you have to have an interest also in the local.
Tell me, what are the red lines? And I also want to ask that Chu, what are these red lines that one cannot talk? Is it about the Communist Party? Is it Xi? Is it Tiananmen? Is it feminism that you told me? Ukraine?
Right.
What are the red lines?
Definitely the red lines that were already there even before Xi Jinping is that you cannot name personally the top officials and their family, for example, corruption. That's like a death sentence, and that has remained even more so with Xi Jinping. You cannot talk about certain issues, for example, in the Uyghur region. Or Tibet is a bit different because of the Dalai Lama is a kind of a big figure, but the sort of certain of the ethnic issues are very rare.
But are you referring to independent and diaspora
Yes.
media? Okay.
Yes,
So
to some extent. There are some exceptions.
To be sure not to have the Beijing arm come to you, you better not talk about certain topics.
Because it's also it's not only that, it's also because it's a very divisive topic within the community, right? Issues of colonialism, issues of how to relate to this, do we accept those labels or not? So I would say the very top leadership and sort of the very sensitive issues. But you will find interviews with, I don't know, Uyghur poets, for example, in some of the diaspora media. They will mention, most of them will actually mention Tiananmen and like the archive and all of that. So, it's a kind of a spectrum, but yeah, that's what I would say.
What would you like to add, Chu?
I think when we talk about the censorship, it's not just like, no, you can't talk about Tiananmen because that's a name. So like the censorship system is way more sophisticated. In recent years, when like in the age of June, you basically can't change your profile picture. So it's not just a certain keywords that are censored, but also like all the online activities is censored in a way that you can't change your profile picture. That to make sure there is nothing will stir any public response. When it comes to censorship, and it's not certain, like I said, it's not about certain words, but it's more about if this issue can stir or trigger public response or public reach, and then it will get censored. So that means it's a progression. So at first, maybe people can actually talk about it. There was quite a story before a couple of years ago. There was a chained woman in one of the Chinese provinces. At first, people talked about it online, and then it was strictly censored because it stirred public reach because of the treatment of women or feminism. So when I say all feminism can be censored, it doesn't mean you can't talk about feminism at all, or you can't talk about women's rights at all. It's just it's all depends on public response.
What do you mean exactly by public response?
It's like when people, so like when that happens, people starting to question why this happened, or like how did the whole thing happen, or how could she be chained for more than 10 years and had so many children without being questioned, or like how the
She
public
was chained, literally chained.
yeah, chained, yeah.
With an iron chain.
Yeah.
There's a woman, okay, quickly.
Yeah.
There's a woman showed by social media, TikTok, in China, in a local rural province, village. She was chained like a dog, literally. She had this big chains on her neck, almost naked, but she was presented as a model mother because she gave birth to 8 children. And then people start to investigate what's happened, and they found she's mentally retarded. She couldn't really understand or express herself, but she was sitting there as a birth slave for the family. And the people found all the villages in China have this problem because there's a one-child policy, means farmer's family, they choose to have one boy, so the boy can be the laborer. Then if you have girls, and girls are abandoned. But in the meanwhile, because of this, so there's more and more men who couldn't even find a wife to marry and give birth. So they buy. So it's a human trafficking. They buy wives. And she's retarded, but she's sitting there for, we don't know how many years, but she gave birth to 8 kids. And she's counted as a...
So it was allowed to comment on this case?
At first, it was
To some
allowed.
point,
To some point, it was allowed, and then it kind of started public discussion about how this was allowed for so many years, and questioned the public authority to the authorities, and then it was started censored. So when I say like, oh, things are censored or there are red lines, it's like it's just you can consider this, think about this as an expanding database that need to be censored, and that will come into the category of censored. And so this is one type. Of course, like there are the absolute ultimate red line. You can't mention like the highest authority, or like the 10.64, like basically Zhong force. That's the thing you can't talk about it. But the others are on the spectrum, or it's in the progression. It all depends on public.
Do you feel under surveillance in Denmark by the Chinese authorities?
Not really, not really. Yeah, because I think like for many people living abroad, they already started, or kind of like started their own strategies to navigate the landscape, or like what are the safe topics if I want to use WeChat, or if I want to use Chinese social media. And for the rest, maybe I would just use others. I don't talk about it on that one. So I think people have this kind of creativity and innovations.
You said, Vivian, and then I open for questions. This is really fascinating. You said that a lot of people choose not to say things because China offers opportunities, so people go back and forth. So I better shut up, but I have the freedom to go back and forth. Would you like to explain?
First, you were discussing the red line, and you saw my confused face, because as I said, we're talking about diaspora Chinese media.
Yes.
So you mentioned, then we talk so much about the censorship, self-censorship. Censorship leads to self-censorship, and the self-censorship is everywhere. Here in the diplomats, among all those business people, you want to have a connection with China. You think so much about how to maintain your bonds, friendship with your Chinese embassy's friends. Then they can offer you opportunities, maybe make the visa easier. Visa is the first lock on everybody's mind. If you want to go to China, you need to behave, then you get a visa. So this is on the daily basis a decision. And of course, for those Chinese people who live outside country, physically you leave that country, but as I mentioned, this control over the public sentiment, control over the public debates, discussions on very normal thing. you talk about women's welfare here in Austria, and then quickly people think of this chained woman. Then the discussions on social media very quickly roll into another topic. Then you start to worry that you, as a speaker, you will be identified as individual. Then either your family in China, they will be knock the door and say, hey, talk to your kid, behave, don't tarnish glory China's image. and we as Chinese citizens, we have this responsibility to uphold and safeguard China's glorious image anywhere, even in the Mars, I believe. So this is how this influence works. And then it's based on the other side, if you decide to shut up, the payoff is a lot. You can be or offered opportunities to receive tourists from China. You can also have the business exchange opportunities. Your kids can be official after going to the universities here. So all those opportunities to develop financially, and when you get rich, you get more opportunity to reach the power. So this is how this network of influence works. So everybody who wants to deal with China, either you are not Chinese or you're Chinese, everybody lives in this shadow. So I would always say the first thing is make up your own mind, how close or how far you want to stay away from this network of influences. Last night I was trying to scare them. I say, if you want to be popular with the Chinese government, usually the first thing is they give you a lot of teasers, a lot of candies, make you happy. And then you will be invited to visit Forbidden City and treated like a queen. Everything, all the doors can be opened for you. And then you will be fed with all the big gifts from expensive to small gifts, all the conveniences your family will receive. Very, very few people can really resist those temptations. But that's how it works.
I have a last question before I open. What if China attacks Taiwan? Will you be feeling safe? Well, I don't ask you, Filip, sorry.
Oh yeah, you ask me, yes.
Yeah,
I'm the only Chinese who lives in the United States. You see me face, okay. No, I don't feel safe, but I can't stop it. I have to be mentally, physically prepared. First is I worried, because during the COVID-19 era, when the virus was described as China virus, we saw a lot of cases just to go back to China. And a lot of Asians in the United States, they are attacked because we all look the same. Secondly, I think it's not about this, it's really about mentality. Because in the Chinese propaganda or the national education, Taiwan is part of China. Inseparable part of Taiwan, inseparable part of China. And we also have another saying, fellows with the same bloodline. So it's always hard to find one group of Chinese killing another group of Chinese. But when I say Chinese, I hesitate because most of the Taiwanese, they hate the term Chinese. They say, we are Taiwanese. I mean, half of Taiwan people. Half of Taiwan, they only want to identify themselves as Taiwanese. So they don't even use the term attack. They use the word invade.
I see. Chu, how would you feel? Or do you think it was far away from Europe? Do you think you could be targeted? Because you said at the beginning, very often in Europe, China and Chinese, by extension, are seen as a threat.
I think like if China attacked Taiwan,
or invades Taiwan, or
yeah,
whatever.
Essentially, it will probably be like how Russians living in Europe feel about their situation here. But
exactly.
But I think like it's geographically Russia, like Ukraine, is like closer to Europe. That makes the whole thing more relevant for Europeans. Taiwan is still a bit far away from the continent. So I feel like here, probably like in the US, it's a big problem than Europe.
Thank you. I open for, are there any questions? Barbara, are there, no? Go ahead and just introduce yourself, please. And also, if one of the colleagues here of Chinese origin wants to share their experience, go ahead.
Yeah, Grachenberg, Institute for the Danube region, Central Europe. I wonder about asylum on the one side, Chinese opposition, Chinese people from Hong Kong and other areas, how it is processed here in the continental Europe, and maybe different in Great Britain because of the history. And the other thing is all these Chinese having work permits, and when they finish the work permit, they may have to go back. This is a normal procedure, I suppose, but in Italy, it seems they lost control about Prato. That's generally said in Italy, so I just wonder how you see this on the one side, the many Chinese working for a period, and others who are really political asylum seekers. Yeah, thank you.
Who will reply that? I guess true.
Okay, so I think like we have to just like you mentioned, like on one hand, it's like political people who come for political asylum, and the other is like the Prato, like workers in Prato. We have to recognize one fact that the community is fragmented. There are quite diverse group of people here in Europe, and how it's just like any other immigration like a policy regarding like immigrant groups. How should Europe define the policy regarding for targeting different groups? I think that's more for the EU or the member states to decide, rather than what we want to talk about it. For like you mentioned, like a lot of control of Prato, but there, like we have to see that it's not like Chinese factories exploiting other Chinese. They are working for the Italian brands, or like, so they are part of the supply chain of the high-end, like made in Italy. So how is the Italian government is going to do about it, or like how they want to make the whole supply chain more transparent, or like how do they want to do to improve their working condition of their factories? That's not just an immigration policy, but more about how to enforce the labor law. Within the law, like how to, the law enforcement, how to inform the labor law. So it's not that's not just a immigration issue, more a labor issue. Yeah.
Thank you. There was another question there. Yep, go ahead.
Yeah, hi, I'm Morris, freelance journalist. I wanted to ask you, we observed when Russia invaded Ukraine that there was a lot of passivity of the Russian diaspora in Europe, even though it's millions of people. Would you expect the same from the Chinese diaspora in Europe or in the United States if the People's Republic would attack Taiwan, that people would take the streets, or would they rather stay in passivity to not endanger their families, or could this be like a turning point?
Good question.
Thank you. Well, I think both of you.
I think like you can just see like during the white paper in 2000.
Do you know what is white paper movements?
Yeah, during the white paper movement, there are protests in the street. I think like you can just apply that to Taiwan. But I assume there will be fewer people to support Taiwan, because like Taiwan part of China is like a more wider consensus than white paper, who people were against all their COVID measures, COVID-related measures. So I would say like probably less people would participate.
Let me first explain this. You say people in China make to the streets, or you're outside? Outside. Okay. So, Okay. So the white movement, white paper movement, I think it was a case that we just spent 12 minutes to explain. So China had this very strict lockdown policy. So in Europe, you suffer for 1 year and 2 years, business stopped. In China, it's completely 3 years. And the people starved to die. Even richest people in Shanghai, they live in residence apartments worthy 30 billion maybe RMB, but they can't find the food because they are not allowed to move. So if people are forced into this situation that you face this desperation, it's about the daily needs, then people really protest. Here in outside China or inside China, that's why, so then young students made to the streets and holding a piece of paper say, we're censored. We now have everything to say, but we can only have a blank piece of paper. So, and urban people protested on the streets in all the leading big city, from Shanghai to Beijing, for days, for at least 2 days. And we broadcast like crazy on social media, all the free media. The world knows, and the world find, oh, the Chinese people still know how to protest and fight. Then Xi Jinping compromised. He quickly lifted the policy. Then it's another story. It's like after the policy was lifted, a lot of aftermath measures were not taken care by nobody. So, but what I want to say is like the social unrest could only be triggered when Chinese people find that their daily life is influenced, is affected. But Taiwan is very tricky, as I mentioned. In the decades of education and brainwash, everybody has this belief that Taiwan is an inseparable part of China. And you can sound liberal on most of the things, but when you talk about the separation or reunion of Taiwan, people split. It's very fragmented. You probably fight with your father who believes Taiwan has to be retaken, but young people, they believe Taiwan people deserve an independent political life. So it depends. But where is the trigger? It's when the whole world is going to sanction China for the so-called attack or invasion, when Chinese economy was highly affected, when people can't really go to any other countries, they can't travel like Russians, and it depends how vast the sanctions and the negative impact that can trigger the anger among Chinese people. Outside asylum and the political activists, I believe they will take a lot of actions too, but still then depends on how close the Chinese Mandarin diaspora community connected with Taiwanese and other political asylum community. Yeah.
Thank you. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you, and it was very lovely to be in this event because it's been a while for me to be away from the civil society development in China. So I'm Li Ping. I was born and raised in China, and now I'm here for my PhD study. So maybe to provide an individual perspective in terms of Chinese diasporas in Europe. So I started my career with NGOs in China for 10 years. And the first NGO I worked full-time was actually an independent media, China Development Brief.
Did we meet? You look
I think so. Yes. So that media is actually an English newsletter reporting civil society's development in China. The founding director was a British. And I was actually working for him, supporting his research as well. Chinese government actually paid attention to that brief for many years. They have been talking to that organization for many years. But the point they made a decision to shut down the organization was actually they found it out that the brief was working on a special report about Xinjiang and about Uyghur. So if there's anything about the red line you just mentioned and Filip mentioned, it was actually that point they decided to shut it down, and I was there. So, but that is before Xi Jinping, that was 2006. So afterwards, I was still working for NGOs for many years, including 4 or 5 years with the LGBT organizations, lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender. At that time, I would say that we were really in a good time that Chinese government was actually rather open for the topic. We managed to do an online survey about homophobia, bullying in school, and we launched a press conference, and out of the 14 coverage it has, 10 of them were actually Chinese media. So it was Chinese media in Chinese, they reported the topic. And that gave a lot of positivity, and we even brought the LGBT rights to UN Human Rights Council, and Chinese government took it very positively as well. They at least didn't reject our recommendations. They actually said they accepted and implemented. So all of those positive developments kind of stopped after she came, but also part of the reason because the movement, the LGBT movement started to be much more radical in China as well, which governments see as a threat. So depending on, a lot of times I think before 2012, a lot of times what you can do as an activist, depending on how you're doing it and what the topics you are working on, yeah. After 2012, I moved out of China, so I moved to Paris, and now I'm, and then Singapore, and then I'm back now. So as a diaspora, I left NGO already. So now if I can give any perspectives, I would see just as an individual Chinese diaspora, how I see media. For example, now I'm living in Vienna, and I know everything what is going on in Vienna through a Chinese social media, little red dot, 小红书. So they actually tells me everything what is going on here. The nice wine tasting festival, the nice beer festival, and what is the Friday free Friday night in the Boulevard. So I know everything what is going on here through the Chinese social media. But if there's anything about talking about politics, about Europe, then I need a different platform. For example, this event, I didn't hear it from that platform, but I heard it from a friend in Austria. She actually forwarded me the information. And if I want to know anything about elections in Austria, the right wings, I go to my friend's Facebook because he posted like literally every day. So that's kind of how I access information. And on another side, for example, I also try to post myself on little red dot social media platform about what is happening here in Europe in general. And I often talk about culture and talk about history, talk about politics, because I feel like if we want to be visible, then we need to tell the Chinese what is going on here as well. But after a while, I receive a request.
Warning, right?
No, not a warning.
Okay.
It's an interview request.
Uh-huh.
And I thought it's a Chinese media who wants to interview me. So I accepted, and I have been talking to the people for 2 months, and the article never got published. And then the question, they just keep asking me the questions, and the question is more and more politically sensitive. They asked me about my army experiences in Singapore. They asked me about my impressions in Taiwan, my experience in Iran, and my travel experiences in Israel. They want to, actually, the government, the authority, I don't have any evidence, but I can tell there's a lot of technology and advanced methods for the Chinese authorities to monitor what is going on outside, for Chinese outside of China. So that's kind of can be interesting, like to, it's also another layer, I would say, to provide and to share. So that's it.
Thank you so much. This is an example of what you were talking about. More, any other questions? Please go ahead.
Yeah, so thank you, first of all, that was super interesting. I also wanted to share something because I found the topic that you mentioned a few times.
Can you just introduce yourself?
Oh, yeah, sorry, Rebecca, also freelance journalist. I find the topic of creativity to go around censorship super interesting. And I listened to presentation a while ago by a researcher he published a study called Listening to Thunder in Silence, and it's about how people in China go around censorship around Tiananmen massacre, and it's super fascinating, like how they use like Taylor Swift shirts or pictures of like a Chinese sportwoman hugging each other, like to talk about or to mention Tiananmen, and I think that's just like the creativity is like often, I think, really fascinating. So I just wanted to quickly share that. And then a question. The question is, how common are VPNs in Chinese society? Because a friend of mine, she told me like, oh yeah, I was in middle school when I like hopped across the firewall. And but on the other hand, I've heard that it's like very only in academic like elite circles that use VPNs. So like how difficult is it from inside China to use those, and how common are they?
Thank you.
We have to talk about Falun Gong when we start talking about their VPN, because most of the Chinese, like when they started, they get in touch with the internet back to 2000 some, I can't remember when, but like back then, it was actually Falun Gong, developed by Falun Gong. It's called like a 自由门, freedom door, for a freedom gate. So they developed that. That's how people use VPN like way back, like probably the first time they interact or like they actually use this one. So I think like the circumvent like tool like VPN is quite wide used in China, probably more than you can imagine. And a lot of people are using like a thread on, like even people living within China, you can see them on Thread, Instagram, or like many of them, of course, many of them you don't use them for political sensitive content. Most of them want use for entertainment.
Okay, let me add some information. We have kind of survey and statistics. The most conservative number is at least 30,000, 30 million, at least 30 million. But I think this number—
You mean 30 million have a VPN?
Yeah, at least 30 million. But considering China has 1.4 billion, I think the number is very little, too conservative. Yeah, Falun Gong, they started to have this website since 2004, because 2003 was the time they were, maybe even earlier than that, they were purged and they were cracked down. And so Falun Gong, but it's just one of the providers. We know there are constantly a number of technology companies. Many of them, they are actually financed and operated by Chinese people who have connection with the Information Technology Ministry in China, a ministry in China. It's like those people who have better technology and political envelope protection. And they find that this is a very strong business opportunity.
You mean people who have connection to the government have the technology so that you can so they can create this hole in the wall?
Yeah, also remember information control, technology, the strongest strength lives in military. So if, just imagine an engineer, he knows how to circumvent, create all kinds of softwares. When you say software, it's just an app. Either it's on the freeway gate provided by Falun Gong, it's just a plug-in. It's just a plug-in you install on your computer or on your phone, and those softwares are constantly upgraded, just like all kinds of apps. But there's always a cat and mouse game. Once an app is very, very popular, meaning they reach a lot of number of users, and then local authorities who monitor this sector of business, they have to not to pretend, even though they know there are always softwares available on the market. And there's like this gray area. As I mentioned, those I know, I can't give the evidence, but the top five most popular softwares that offering self-convention features, they all have this kind of connection. So they have this confidence that they can run. You never know, because just remember, once you install the app, they also have a backdoor to the data we're mentioning. So they actually need to know how many people have the access to the information they don't want people to watch. But still, there's a constant chase and stop, up game. That's also, as I mentioned, there are a lot of organizations who have this special permission. Universities, militaries, anything to do with technology innovation, or the embassies. You have to get the permits. But then it's all about privilege, corruption, how far you're close to the powers.
Thank you. Other questions? Sarah, please.
Hi, my name is Sarah Emler from the Austrian Public Broadcaster. Thank you so much for this really interesting panel and discussion. I have a question on, Vivian, you mentioned that correspondents from international news outlets, they lived in China for a really long time or in multiple Asian countries, and they know the languages, they know the culture, and that it's different to nowadays where journalists spend 2 years there and then go to different countries. And of course, this is a problem if they can't read between the lines and detect the propaganda, in between the propaganda. What would you recommend news organizations do or journalists do? Because I can hardly imagine, I can imagine that it might be interesting to go to maybe China as a correspondent now for 2 or 4 years, but to imagine to go there now for 10 years in a country that is very much controlled. You're smiling now, Filip. I mean, I have a cousin who studied in Shanghai, and I remember she had a bottle, a shampoo that was too big to take along on the train or something, and she kind of tried to take it along anyway, and it was immediately stopped. So it's very strict. So I can't imagine that someone wants to or to find so many people that go there and say, okay, I want to live there now for 10 years. So what can international news organizations do to still read between the lines and offer the news to the international audience and maybe also to the Chinese diaspora here on news on China?
Okay, just very quickly answer 2 questions. First is we were talking about the deterioration of the quality of international coverage. But I always say this deterioration, this going down trend is created by the mounting control over the international correspondence. In the past, a journalist who looked white, you're totally visible. You're different, you're lao wai, meaning you're an outsider. Then you can travel everywhere, just buy a ticket. As long as, first thing you have to get press accreditation. That means each organization have a quota. New York Times only have 3 to 5 accreditation. So when New York Times criticized Xi Jinping years ago, the first thing is that quota was cut to 2 or 3. So the most successful journalist who did the best journalism, of course, is the strongest voice, criticize authorities. Then they are kicked out simply by losing their accreditation. That's why Chris Buckley now has to base in Taiwan to cover China. But his title is still China correspondent for New York Times. So, so this quota is a thread on everybody, a sword on everybody's head. And secondly, after you get the accreditation, you start to worry you need to maintain that press, because it's never permanent. You can get it today and tomorrow you're kicked out. The most prominent case was happening 3 years ago in Beijing when 2 Austrian journalists, ABC, Austrian Broadcasting Corporation. Australian. I know Austria and Australia. I know Austria has a reception table only taking care of people who try to fly to Australia and landed up here. So 2 ABC journalists, Australian Broadcasting Corporation, they said they were kicked out of China in 2 days. Just because maybe Beijing government wanted to show some color to Austria when Austria was very tough in Beijing.
Australia.
Australia, sorry, this time it's Australia. So Beijing government wants to show some color to Sydney, so they kick these two journalists out. And then it's a chilling effect. People start to work correspondence. Oh, finally, I spent 2 years studying Chinese. I moved my family, I moved my kids, and I will kick it out. So this pressure is very constant. Not to mention, if you move around in China, there are a real face recognition camera. Police can approach you. People on the streets, Chinese people are known for being very friendly with Laowai, with foreigners. But that trend is changing because the state media propaganda always say foreign correspondents are tarnishing China image. And we BBC journalists are known for using the death filter when we were covering Wuhan COVID. But that documentary actually was produced by my team, so I know there's no such deliberation tone change. But BBC was targeted all the time for being critical about Xinjiang, then we have a lot of trouble. So you don't know if those people, they are normal citizens or they are plainclothes police, but they harass you on the streets. They stop you from nowhere. So these three reasons keep international correspondence so difficult. But what to read? Yeah, the question is how to survive, how to read. I think international media still have to make use of this accreditation system. Just always try, always apply, because there's not a single law yet banning foreigners working in China. So they should always try to use this rule of law toward weapons to negotiate. Also depends on how your government is pushing the envelope. Thirdly, it's international media needs to be very clear and loud on many, many issues. You should say, we're not trying to weaponize press. We are doing exactly the same job we do in other countries. So don't think we're trying to make China look bad. We're just telling the truth. So the government always needs to be constantly educated. So don't just push back completely. A diplomatic channel needs to work. And also cross-check and international cooperation. So there are cases that foreign correspondents work together on one, not for correspondence, organizations. Also, that's why you need to work with diaspora Chinese people, because we're the experts of China. We all have local network. We all have our journalists who are working on the ground. And they are so eager to tell China to the world. So make friends with your Chinese people, but be careful. Those two months investigation on you, I wouldn't say it's an interview. I'm pretty sure you're approached by somebody, but don't be afraid, yeah.
Thank you. Filip, you wanted to add?
Yeah, I don't have, unfortunately, a solution. I think no one has. But to build on what also Vivian said, I think there is also a duty among European journalists to precisely make a sort of, fair balance. How many official media Chinese journalists, for example, are registered and are given a media visa in Austria?
Good point.
Versus how many are allowed? And to constantly maintain the pressure. I know it doesn't have really an influence if you even go in front of the Chinese embassy and protest, but you can influence precisely politicians, diplomats, that you have constantly updated information. Why Austria has, I'm saying it's the case, I'm ignorant, has 0 or let's say 1 or 2 journalists officially registered in China. How many have applied and have been rejected or played with? Okay, you go to Taiwan for 8 months, 12 months, maybe one day you'll go to China, and in the mail you'll go for a week. But it's your duty as journalists, as a club, including, I think, of your organization, to maintain this list and to work, of course, at the European level. And this is the same with Russia, of course. Why all those journalists from China or Russia who work for state-owned media, I'm very precise, I'm not mixing everything, how come they can work freely in Europe, and why we don't have even, I'm not saying half, but 1/10 of that? And I think that's a duty for us as journalists to maintain this information, even create a website and educate your politicians.
You should use your government to fight and just negotiate. To say we need an equal treatment. If a CCTV News Xinhua agency has 500 agents, journalists, agents plus journalists, I have to say agents, because they all have this job to PR and monitor. So use this equal treatment.
Would you like to add something?
Yeah.
Oh, just add something like for foreign correspondents, they are like I just want to say like even you are here, you're of course the best scenario or the ideal scenario is that like you can actually go to China and work in China. But there is possible way to actually use public information to investigate Chinese enterprise. There are also like just try to learn Chinese and use the Chinese database or like use like VPN actually to access Chinese internet. There are ways to do like a reverse engine to see like by their activities out overseas to track back to China. So there are ways. So I think it's possible to actually cooperate or like in a secure way with Chinese journalists to do some cross-border reporting. And I just want to do a small promotion. Like I just did one guide for Global Investigative Journalism Network. It's about how to use different kind of public information to actually investigate Chinese companies. Through different techniques. So I think maybe like later you can find it on their website and to actually try to find ways to cooperate. Even you can't go there. There are ways.
But you also will publish a list of media in English, I understood.
That's a guide in English. So it will introduce like a different kind of techniques or different databases. You can actually trace Chinese enterprise, the activities of Chinese enterprises all over the world. And then you can find a ways or maybe like find a case in Austria and then trace back to China. So it's, yeah.
Is there any medium, podcast or the website in English that you would recommend that you three trust and you would say, well, if you want to read about China, this would be a good start for you start.
I mean, I mentioned Circle 19. I think it's more academic, but at least it gives you a very good sort of background. I think that also what we do in Prague at AMO, especially if you're looking at China and one specific country in Europe, sort of investigations, papers, articles, reports, and it's not in Czech, it's in English, so you can read it. So I would mention this.
I just want to ask you, Filip, why there are competing institutions in Prague that deal with China and they hate each other. I mean, I have this experience when we previously cooperated. I discovered in a small country like the Czech Republic, there are a couple of institutions they deal with China and they hate each other and they're competing.
Well, in Czech,
can you explain this?
In Czech, we say Český rybníček, which means like it's a little, the pond is really too tiny. It's, you know, I mean, I disagree. The Czech Republic is a small country because there are smaller countries. So I'm very careful with this term of small countries. Mm-hmm. But I think that it's first of all, it's very unfortunate. Like no one wins out of that. We should all be cooperating. To some extent, some are able. They tolerate each other. But I think it boils down just to personality. It's just a human factor.
In Spanish, there is an expression, small pond and too many crocodiles. Which would...
I would recommend Merrick's, their analysis. I think they are quite precise and accurate reflection of China. And I think all the analysts there, they know good English. They have like they speak good, really good Chinese, and they can do research in Chinese. So they quite know the real picture of China. And the other is Vivian just mentioned like the state media. They use or like CCP use all kinds of like really nonsense words. You don't really know what they're talking about. So there is another one. It's called like Decode China. it's like the team member, like they are quite good China scholars. They actually comprehend what actually, when they say certain words that we know, like media freedom or like press freedom or like multilateralism, all kinds of words that's familiar to us, but they have a different definition of that. So you can look at the Decode China. They decode all the party language. What do they mean when they say this or that? It's quite different from what we normally know. So I think these are good sources.
And last night you said something that I just want to share briefly because we are coming to the end, and that is that you think that some think tanks in Europe, especially in Germany, do a very good job when it comes to China, analyzing China.
Yeah. So like Merrick, I think like their analysts, like they can speak good Chinese or they lived in China for many years. So they know China quite well, and also like they can capture the nuances. Yeah.
Thank you. And you?
I have to self-promote. Dasheng, we mentioned we focus on Chinese community, but always remember, I make it very language friendly. All my interviews made subtitle available, meaning I can, and we edit. We also have abstract and the comments in all kinds of languages. So do check on us on YouTube.
And the others?
No, I have to say this. Dasheng, DASHENG.media, and you find me on YouTube. And we do. Why I'm mentioning this is not really about promoting me. Remember, I said I talked to the top scholars. They're the best analysts. Because I'm very impatient with bullshit. If I find a person super smart and useful, I want to amplify their voice. That's why I do a lot of sit-down interviews to analyze why this is the most important thing. So Chinese people find this fascinating. I believe this is helpful. Other website, I think Asia Society had this website called the China File. They update slowly, but all their guest writers are good. They're real experts. Also, our friend David, he had this China Media Project. They have this tradition to monitor Chinese media and do very language-friendly translation and explanation of those murky language. So check it out. Yeah.
Well, I think yes, there is a question online, and now go ahead, Barbara.
Yeah. It's not really a question, it's something that I was also just thinking of. So Dana Ruffalo asks, please write down for us these alternative news sources. I cannot catch the spelling otherwise.
Well,
maybe we can come up with a handout or like a list and send out through email. I think
yes.
that might be easier.
Yeah. I thank everybody. Now you can have a coffee and talk to our speakers. Tete, I don't know if I said it correctly. I thank you so much for sharing. I know that it is very difficult to summarize thousands of years of history and 1.5 billion Chinese in 2 hours and 2.5 million diaspora in Europe in 2 hours with all of its diversity. But I think we did what we could. You did the best you could. And I didn't say at the beginning, but this is an introductory event, and we shall do more. Thank you so much.